So I was looking up some stuff online, and this video by CrashCourse on metaethics came up in the search results. Now, when I first saw this video in the search results, I was initially a bit wary because, usually people do these sorts of videos on metaethics, and it's basically become par for the course at this point for people to just misrepresent anti-realist positions. So I wasn't very optimistic that this video was going to be an accurate representation of metaethics. But I watched it and it ended up misrepresenting things even more than I was initially expecting. So much so that I thought it would be worth making a response to it, to kind of correct the errors made here. So here we are. Let's play the video.
Is it wrong to steal to feed your family? Is there such a thing as a good lie? Questions like these are the domain of ethics, the branch of philosophy that studies morality, or right and wrong behavior. But before we can parse questions like these, we need to go deeper into metaethics, which studies the very foundations of morality itself. Metaethics asks questions as basic as, what is morality? What's its nature? Like, is it an objective thing out there in the world waiting to be known? Or is it more like a preference, an opinion, or just a bunch of cultural conventions? There are a lot of different metaethical views out there, and one way to understand them is to put them to a test to see how they'd help you solve some thorny ethical problems. Like a scenario where you have to steal food or lie for a good cause. Or what about this? What if you set out to harm someone, but you ended up saving their life by accident?
I would be so pissed off if I set out to harm someone, but I ended up saving their life by accident.
Some people think that ethics is a kind of science, that it seeks to discover moral truths whose existence is testable and provable. But others believe the nature of morality is every bit as subjective as whether you prefer plain M&Ms or peanut. There's just no right answer, unless you have a peanut allergy. So you and a friend might totally agree on whether something is immoral or not, but you might disagree fervently about why. For an example of a slippery moral scenario, let's just head straight over to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. A burglar plots to break into an old woman's house on a Sunday morning, a time when he knows she's always at church. So one Sunday, he creeps up to her back window and smashes it with a hammer. But after he looks inside, he sees the old woman isn't at church. She's in there, laying face down on the floor. The sight of her body scares the burglar and he runs away. He was down for a little bit of burglary, but getting nabbed for murder was not part of his plan. But what the burglar didn't know was that the woman wasn't dead. She was unconscious, having passed out because of a carbon monoxide leak that would have killed her. When the burglar broke the window, he let out some of the toxic gas and let in fresh air, which allowed her to regain consciousness. So the burglar broke into the house with the intention of stealing from the woman, but inadvertently, he saved her life. Did the burglar do a good thing? Does he deserve praise even though he didn't intend to help the woman? Likewise, does he still deserve blame even though he didn't actually get around to stealing anything and ended up saving the woman's life? Thanks, Thought Bubble. Your answers to these questions will help you suss out where your moral sensibilities lie. And why you answer the way you do will say a lot about what metaethical view you subscribe to. One of the most wide
Yeah, so I don't see how your answer to these questions is going to indicate anything, really, about your metaethical views. Whether certain types of actions are good or bad, or whether they are praiseworthy or blameworthy, is a question about normative ethics, not metaethics.
widely held metaethical views is known as moral realism, the belief that there are moral facts in the same way that there are scientific facts. In this view,
Yeah, so moral realism would be best characterized as the view that there are specifically stance independent moral facts, because just the view that there are moral facts that's actually compatible with certain anti realist views.
any moral proposition can only be true or false. And for a lot of us, our gut intuition tells us that there are moral facts. Some things are just wrong and others are indisputably right. Like, a lot of people think that gratuitous violence is always wrong and nurturing children is always right, no matter what. But you don't have to dig very deep into moral realism before you run into trouble. Like, for one thing, if there are moral facts, where do they come from? How do we know what they are? Are they testable, like scientific facts are? Are they falsifiable? And if morality is based on facts, then why is there so much disagreement about what's moral and what's not, as opposed to science, where there's often more consensus? This is what's known as the grounding problem. The grounding problem of ethics is the search for a foundation for our moral beliefs, something solid that would make them true in a way that is clear, objective, and unmoving. If you can't find a way to ground morality, you might be pushed toward another metaethical view, moral anti-realism. This is the belief that moral propositions don't refer to objective features of the world at all, that there are no moral facts. So a moral
Yeah, so the moral anti-realism is not the view that there are no moral facts. Moral anti-realism is the view that there are no stance-independent moral facts. Again, there are certain anti-realist views under which there are moral facts. They're just stance-dependent facts rather than stance-independent facts.
anti-realist would argue that there's nothing about gratuitous violence that's inherently wrong.
Yeah, so nothing about moral anti-realism entails that gratuitous violence isn't inherently wrong. The view that gratuitous violence is inherently wrong is completely compatible with moral anti-realism.
Likewise, they'd say, if you look at the rest of the animal kingdom, sometimes nurturing your kids doesn't seem like it's that important. So maybe morality isn't the same for everyone. But still, most people you know, including yourself probably, are committed to some form of moral realism. And there
Yeah, so I don't see why I should think that most people are committed to some form of moral realism. This is just asserted, but I don't see why I should grant that. And certainly for myself, I think that's definitely false. I don't have realist intuitions at all, and I have very strong anti realist intuitions. So I definitely don't think I'm committed to some form of moral realism.
are many forms. So let's familiarize ourselves with some of its most popular flavors. Some moral realists are moral absolutists. Not only do they believe in moral facts, they believe that there are some moral facts that don't change. So for them, if something is wrong, it's wrong regardless of culture or circumstance. Moral facts apply as universally and as constantly as gravity or the speed of light. If moral absolutism sounds too rigid, maybe moral relativism would appeal to you.
Yeah, so the moral absolutism, as it's being described here, is not even a metaethical view. It's a normative view, the view that there are certain actions that are morally wrong, regardless of the circumstances. That's compatible with both realism and anti realism. It's not a realist view. An anti realist can think that there are certain actions, for example, maybe killing innocent people, that are always wrong, regardless of the circumstances. Nothing about that position entails realism. I don't know why this is being listed as a form of realism.
This view says that more than one moral position on a given topic can be correct. And one of the most common forms of moral relativism is cultural relativism.
Okay, yeah, I don't know why this is being listed as a form of realism either. Moral relativism is not a realist view. Moral relativism is actually neither realist nor anti realist. Um, though, if anything, I would assume that most metaethical relativists probably are anti realists. So, again, I don't know why this is being listed as a form of moral realism. It's not a form of moral realism.
But there are actually two different things a person might mean when they talk about cultural relativism. The more general kind is descriptive cultural relativism. This is simply the belief that people's moral beliefs differ from culture to culture. No one disputes that. It seems obviously true. Like, some cultures believe that capital punishment is morally right, and other cultures believe it is morally wrong, that killing another human is inherently unethical. But there's also normative cultural relativism, which says that it's not our beliefs, but moral facts themselves that differ from culture to culture. So in this view, capital punishment is morally
Okay, well, normative cultural relativism is not the view that moral facts differ from culture to culture. Moral normative cultural relativism is a view that says we should tolerate the moral practices and views of other cultures. It's not about the moral
correct
facts
in some
changing from
cultures
culture to
and
culture.
morally wrong in others. Here, it's the moral fact of the matter that differs based on culture. Now, normative cultural relativism might sound pretty good to you. It does at first to a lot of people, because it seems like it's all about inclusiveness and tolerance. Who am I to tell other cultures how they should live, right? But this view actually has some pretty big flaws. If every culture is the sole arbiter of what's right for it, that means no culture can actually be wrong. It means Nazi culture actually was right for the people living in that culture. A dissenting German voice in, say, 1940 would have just been wrong if it had claimed that Jewish people deserve to be treated the same as other Germans. And what makes things even weirder is that if normative cultural relativism is true, then the concept of moral progress doesn't make sense either. If what everyone is doing right now is right relative to their own culture, then there's never any reason to change anything. Problems like these make some people take a second look at the anti-realist stance.
So, one thing that's weird about this is that he says there are two things that people can mean by cultural relativism. And he lists descriptive cultural relativism and normative cultural relativism. But there's actually a third type of cultural relativism, which he just completely leaves out, which is meta-ethical cultural relativism. And it's bizarre that he leaves that out because this is a video about meta-ethics, but he's going to leave out meta-ethical cultural relativism, but talk about descriptive and normative cultural relativism, which are not even meta-ethical views. Um, the the description he gives for normative cultural relativism is actually a more accurate description of meta-ethical cultural relativism. The fact that moral facts differ from culture to culture. Yeah, that's meta-ethical cultural relativism, not normative cultural relativism.
Which, remember, is the view that there just aren't any moral facts. Just
Yeah, again, moral anti-realism is not the view that there are no moral facts. It's the view that there are no stance-independent moral facts.
one flavor of moral anti-realism is moral subjectivism. This view says that moral statements can be true and false.
Yeah, so it's bizarre that he characterizes anti-realism as the view that there are no moral facts, and then he lists subjectivism as a form of anti-realism. On subjectivism, there are moral facts. Now, people sometimes mean different things when they talk about subjectivism. Sometimes subjectivism can refer to just like any view where moral statements express propositions, and those propositions refer to statements about attitudes. So, ideal observer theory could be considered like subjectivist, or certain forms of divine command theory could be considered subjectivist. So sometimes people use subjectivism in that kind of more broad sense, just any view where the moral facts are dependent on attitudes. Whereas, like, some other times it's used to refer specifically to a form of individual moral relativism. The moral facts are dependent on certain individuals. But either way, regardless of what we're talking about, there are moral facts on subjectivism. So I just don't know why, you know, he's characterizing things like this. It's a very bizarre and proprietary way to characterize things.
right or wrong, but they refer only to people's attitudes rather than their actions. By this thinking, capital punishment is neither right nor wrong, but people definitely have preferences about it, and those preferences key into personal attitudes, but not into actual.
Okay, no, like, subjectivism is not going to be the view that capital punishment is neither right nor wrong. Right? If you're talking about, say, like, individual subjectivism is going to say whether capital punishment is right or wrong is going to be relative to people's individual moral standards. So it might be wrong relative to my individual moral standards, but right relative to another person's individual moral standard. It's not the view that it's neither right nor wrong.
Objective moral facts about the world. Like, some people favor capital punishment and think it's just, others oppose it and think it's unjust. But it doesn't go any deeper than that. There are no moral facts, only moral attitudes. There are other varieties.
Yeah, so no. On subjectivism, moral facts, there are moral facts, and the moral facts just refer to facts about attitudes. So again, if you take individual subjectivism, and I say causing people suffering is wrong, that's going to be a moral fact, because causing people suffering is wrong. That just translates to I disapprove of causing people suffering, something like that. And I disapprove of causing people suffering. That is a fact. It's a proposition, and it's true. So on moral subjectivism, there are moral facts. It's just that they refer to facts about attitudes. It is not the view that there are no moral facts.
Varieties of both moral realism and anti-realism, but this should give you an idea of the general meta-ethical lay of the land. And by now, it probably seems like I've given you.
Yeah. Okay. So he says that I've given you. This should give you a general view of the meta-ethical lay of the land. Well, no. Like, I mean, first of all, moral realism and moral anti-realism are characterized incorrectly. Second of all, again, the two examples he lists as forms of moral realism are not even forms of moral realism. They're not even meta-ethical views. For moral anti-realism, he lists subjectivism. He mischaracterizes subjectivism. And then he doesn't even give the other forms of anti-realism. Moral subjectivism is not even the most popular form of anti-realism. Other forms of anti-realism would be error theory and non-cognitivism, both of which, if you look at like the Phil paper survey, those are actually more popular positions among anti-realists than subjectivism. So, like, why include just subjectivism and completely leave out the other two?
An idea of the general meta-ethical lay of the land. And by now, it probably seems like I've given you a lot more problems than solutions. So let's talk about the moral frameworks you'll use to navigate your way
Okay,
through.
yeah, so the rest of the video, he just talks about like normative ethical theories, like natural law theory and utilitarianism. It doesn't really have anything to do with meta ethics. I mean, a lot of the stuff he's already talked about in this video didn't really have anything to do with metaethics. But yeah, so this video was a massive misrepresentation of metaethics. It got incredibly basic things about metaethics wrong. Um, and it's misinforming a lot of people, unfortunately. This video has about 2 million views, 36,000 likes, and like all these people after watching of this, now they're just completely misinformed about the topic. So anyway, that's my response to this video by Crash Course. Yeah, I'll see you in the next video.